Maybe he will, maybe he won't. He'll make up his mind at the last minute. President Donald Trump makes waging war sound like a simple, everyday decision. Is direct US military involvement in the Israel-Iran conflict the only way to force a lasting resolution? While Trump mulls war, European foreign ministers talk peace with their Iranian counterpart. But has Europe left its run too late? It's up for debate here on CounterPoints with me, Melinda Nucifora. He likes to call himself the Peacemaker-in-Chief, the president who committed himself to ending America's forever wars. Now, that same president is considering dropping a bomb on Iran.
I have ideas as to what to do, but I haven't made a final. I like to make the final decision 1 second before it's due, because things change. I mean, especially with war, things change with war. It can go from one extreme to the other.
Israel and Iran's tit-for-tat bombing campaign has entered a second week and, without a circuit breaker, could continue to grind on indefinitely. So, would a definitive US strike force an end to the conflict, or would it just be the start of another broader regional war? Iran says it's no longer willing to negotiate with the US, so European governments have stepped in to try to broker a deal. UK, German and French foreign ministers are meeting their Iranian counterpart in Geneva. But does Europe hold any cards here? They've played second fiddle to the US on Middle East affairs for so long. Have they lost their leverage? On this episode of CounterPoints, we'll debate, is a US strike needed to force an end to the conflict? Does Europe have the power to broker a deal with Iran? And has Israel overplayed its hand and taken its regional fight too far? Well, to discuss the conflict between Iran and Israel and the prospect of the US becoming embroiled in the fight, I'm joined by Ambassador David Satterfield, a former US ambassador to Lebanon and until last year was President Biden's special envoy for humanitarian aid for Gaza. Also on our panel is German diplomat Martin Kobler. He's held various ambassadorial posts across the Middle East and was formerly a UN Special Envoy for Libya. And rounding out our guest list this week is Colonel Richard Kemp, a former British military officer who has worked in operations both in Iraq and Afghanistan and in addition, various other roles in the British Ministry of Defence. Gentlemen, thank you for your time here on CounterPoints. It's pretty clear now that Israel can't achieve its operational objectives in Iran without US intervention. It can't take out Iran's underground nuclear base without US weapons. So instead, it's targeting infrastructure and civilians above ground. But to get enough damage done, it's going to have to keep up that bombing campaign for weeks, if not months. Meanwhile, Iran says it now more than ever is insistent that it won't relinquish its nuclear program. So both sides are digging in, and this conflict could now just grind on for months. That means more civilians on both sides will die. So is a circuit breaker needed? Ambassador Satterfield, let me start with you. Should the US strike Fordo and get involved more openly in this fight to make that circuit breaker, or will that make the situation worse?
Well, I would challenge many of the assumptions contained in your opening remarks, which ignore almost completely the Iranian agency in all of this. Iran's active work on highly enriched uranium, designed whether or not weaponization occurs to provide the threat of weaponization as a tool for advancement of its ambitions in the region, as well, of course, as its support for proxies who have the blood of every country represented on this screen and many others on their hands. But your question as to what is to be done now, there's a window. there's a window of opportunity still for a non-kinetic, a non-military resolution to this. I think it's very clear that President Trump has concerns over the question, first, of the effectiveness of a U.S. strike or series of strikes to truly end the enrichment program in a definitive fashion. Secondly, what the consequences of such a strike would be with respect to U.S. interests in the region. And finally, how to avoid all of this becoming another prolonged conflict, which is something that he and many Americans, and I think not unlike Joe Biden at the end of his administration, want to avoid. It isn't inevitable that there is a strike, but to make it not inevitable, Iran is going to have to come to the table.
Iran was at the table, though, before Israel launched its strikes a week ago. So they were at the table.
For 8 weeks, they were at the table refusing to agree to an end to the enrichment program. So, yes, they were at the table, but the table produced nothing. And the circumstances now would dictate that Iran must recognize, and I hope in the European meetings taking place today with Iranian officials, there's a consistent message. You have a chance, but you need to take it now.
Martin, what's your take? Should the US get involved? Do you think they will get involved? What kind of conflict would it become if they did?
Well, I would like to add on what David said, not to lose out of sight the Iranian behavior. I mean, in addition to what David said, Iran has been consistently threatening Israel with extinction. So this is really a problem of survival of the Israeli state. Now, if this comes together, that Iran has been threatening Israel with destroying, with annihilating the whole country for 30 years now. I mean, this is a philosophy. This is on the genes of the PR machine of the Iranians. If this comes together with a high enrichment of uranium to make a bomb possible, I mean, this, I think, justifies what we are seeing right now. But coming back to your question, whether the Americans will or will not intervene here, Trump has a strategic ambiguity here. He says, I know, I don't know, or maybe not. So let's wait. However, I only can encourage those who are now sitting together, like the 3 European foreign ministers. I hope they're coordinating very intensely with the United States here in order to prevent the American intervention here. I think it's very important to give diplomacy a chance. You are right that there were already talks going on. However, they were not fruitful. And now we have the situation of the Israeli-Iran war, so to say, and it's extremely important that these diplomatic talks go on. Now, all those who have experience in negotiating with Iranians know how this is done, how the procrastination is done. So you see, it's of little importance whether they were sitting together before. How are they behaving now with the circumstances we have now?
Richard, what's your read on it?
I think the first thing I'd say is I think the worst possible outcome of this would be a diplomatic solution. War is obviously a terrible thing, but sometimes there are things worse than war. And I think if there was any kind of an agreement between Iran and the United States or any other country, it simply wouldn't be worth the paper it's written on. We'd just be back to square one if Israel wasn't able to finish the job that it started. Let's not forget that when President Obama's JCPOA came into force, numerous times the Iranian regime cheated on that agreement. It didn't honor the agreement. It hasn't honored its undertakings under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, and it won't do so. I think that it sounds good, and we're all accustomed to a diplomatic solution's best, but I don't think in this case it is. I think the answer is to, as far as it can be possibly done, is to destroy the Iranian nuclear program, or certainly as a minimum set it back by many, many years, which I think has partly already been done. And preferably to bring down the regime. Now, that clearly has to be done from within, and I don't know I know there are a number of opposition groups in Iran. I don't know if any of them has the capability or indeed the courage to actually topple the regime now. But clearly this is an ideal opportunity for them to do so. They've seen the weakness of this regime. They've seen it exposed both in the offensive operations by Israel and their own attempts at offensive operations against Israel. I think the reality is, you've spoken about this war going on for maybe weeks or months. I'm not sure if that would be necessary. I think we're seeing Iran. It's not exhausted, but it certainly has had absolutely minimal strategic impact on Israel so far.
Richard, let me ask you though, if Israel can have nuclear weapons and not declare them, why can't Iran?
Here's why, and let me be very blunt on this. Iran is a bandit regime, a rogue regime, a terrorist regime. For 46 years, it directly and through proxies has threatened, has killed, has murdered, has challenged virtually everyone in the region. It has attacked directly its own neighbors. It has indeed, as Martin has said, proclaimed for decades that the annihilation of the Zionist entity, as it calls it, is its objective. It is a different matter altogether between Israel's reported possession of nuclear weapons and the threat that Iran, even now, without a weapon, but the potential to develop a weapon, poses.
Richard, when I asked that question, you had a bit of a giggle. What's your take? I mean, if Israel's allowed to, why isn't Iran?
Well, I think you've just had that question partially answered. Israel is not a terrorist state. It's not a dictatorship like Iran is. It's a democratic country with democratic processes. And I think that the prospects, Iran has made it very clear it intends to annihilate the Zionist state, and it created this network of proxies around the region to do exactly that. We have no reason to believe that a nuclear-armed Iran would not carry out its threats. Israel has made no such threats against anybody. And I think you can illustrate, I think the kind of the rationale can be illustrated to an extent by the fact that Israel has allegedly, and I don't think they've admitted to it, but Israel has allegedly had a nuclear weapons capability for many decades now. Iran is getting closer, has been getting closer to nuclear program for a long time. To my knowledge, no country in the region, with the exception of Iran, has sought nuclear weapons out of fear of Israel's nuclear program. But there are a number of countries in the region, not least Saudi Arabia, which has been actively looking towards acquiring its own nuclear capability if Iran gains its one. So it really, I think that shows what certainly the view in the region is of Israel's nuclear weapons program, and or potential alleged nuclear weapons program. And it shows the fear of Iran gaining nuclear weapons.
Martin, let me take you back to something that Richard said in his first answer, that diplomacy would be the worst possible outcome and that Israel should be able to finish the job. What do you make of that?
Well, first of all, let me comment on the strong words of David. I wouldn't use such strong words in a situation. Also, I totally agree in substance if I want to sit together with the regime. So, I mean, if I were about to negotiate with the Iranians, I would accept them as a partner, as a difficult partner, as a partner now under military pressure. And I think it's important to keep the relation going on. And we have been, or I have been negotiating weeks and weeks with Iranians, so it's very important. And I have no illusion about the substance of the regime, but it's very important not to block the diplomatic channel by using words. Also, sometimes the American president uses with his partners. Now, when it comes to your question, Melinda, what Richard said, I think one always, as a layman or as a civilian, I would say, if you enter into military action, you have an aim. Yeah, it's justified in this case. I think if the enrichment is far enough progressed to an extent where there is an enrichment, you can build nuclear warheads with it, and this is around 90%. So then it's what is the aim? The aim, the Israeli government said, is the destruction of nuclear facilities. Now, this also can be a delay. There will be no total destruction of nuclear facilities. Because this is very difficult to achieve, not even with American weapons, I think. So there will always be a scope of uncertainty. So, but to reduce the capability of the Iranian regime to further enrich in the next years, in the years to come, to enrich uranium to an extent that it reaches 90%, this, I think, is the aim. Everything which is mentioned apart from this, like regime change, is certainly not a matter of what can be achieved. If it's a secondary effect, and if the Iranian people decides, I mean, to topple their regime, so be it. And nobody would start crying here. However, this cannot be, regime change cannot be, and the Americans had bad experience with it, cannot be the target and the aim of this operation against Iran. I want to make the point once again, Melinda, because you asked the question about Israel has nuclear weapons, why can't Iran has? I only can agree with those who say Israel doesn't threaten other countries with annihilation, and Iran does. Imagine the United Arab Emirates would be threatened, or Germany, or any other country. I don't know where you're from, your country maybe, would be threatened by a regime over decades. In the meantime, trying to destroy it and threatening with annihilation. I mean, this just cannot be accepted, independent of what is happening. I also do not agree with the Israeli government, what's going on right now in Gaza and these things. But this cannot be an excuse to go on with this philosophy of annihilation of the Israeli state.
It's interesting you mentioned that, because we are going to come to that as a point a little bit later in our debate, Israel's actions here, whether they've gone too far. But let's hold fire on that and come back to that and the point you've just made a little bit later in our debate. Ambassador Satterfield, this idea of learning from the past, I mean, you've all had experience in the Middle East, Iraq no least. We saw what happened when the US and its allies went in on the pretense of weapons of mass destruction, and that turned into a disaster. Can you bomb your way to peace?
No, Linda, and look, President Trump, this administration, made clear in the president's Riyadh remarks what has long been signaled, that the era post 9/11 of quixotic regime change, nation building, democracy building efforts at the cost of U.S. and other blood and treasure is over. It's finished. It has no support from the majority of Americans. It has no support from this administration. And I would say to you, if Joe Biden had had a second term, I don't believe his policies in this regard would be significantly different.
And yet, if he does go in and
is not a US
executes
objective.
this strike, as he says he's thinking about, isn't that exactly what he's doing?
No, it is not exactly what he's doing. He has made clear his efforts. Whatever rhetoric comes from various individuals in the Israeli government, and there's a spectrum of expression, his objective is the enrichment program itself and bringing this to a close. But it is more than just the enrichment program. The president wants to see stability established in the Middle East. He is not happy with Gaza. He is not happy with the inability to get a Saudi deal. And he is certainly not happy with what looks like a continued endless campaign in Iran. He wants to close this.
And if I may add, Melinda, I mean, one cannot compare Iraq with Iran now. Nobody thinks about a ground invasion. I mean, Iraq was a ground invasion. In our view, it was not legal. It was contrary to international law because it was done without the Security Council approval. Others see it differently. However, 150,000 American soldiers and others invaded the country. And this is not the philosophy right now and the strategy right now with Iran. What's being discussed is to use American military Air Force potential with bunker blasters and B-2 bombers in order to go deeper into the bunkers where the enrichment is taking place. This cannot be compared to what was planned in 2003 with Iraq.
Mm-hmm.
Just one other
go ahead.
Observation I'd like to put in here is, in your opening comments, you made the assertion that Israel cannot complete its objectives in Iran without American assistance. I don't think there's any real basis for that. I do believe that American intervention using its bunker buster bombs would certainly do a very successful job on Fordo. But I also believe that Israel has the capabilities of doing pretty much that as well. It doesn't have the same...
It doesn't have the same ammunition, the same weapons to do what the US can do.
There are other ways of doing it, and we don't know. I mean, I don't know, and you don't know what Israel's capabilities are on Fordo and what their plans are on Fordo. I would suggest that the Prime Minister of Israel would not have launched this operation without a clear plan as to how he was going to deal with it, which probably did not, unless he has an agreement with President Trump that we're not aware of, which probably did not include having US involvement as a prerequisite. So we'll have to see what happens about that. I'm not suggesting that it would be a bad thing for the United States to deal with Fordo if President Trump's inclined to do so, but I don't think we should assume either that Israel can't deal with Fordo.
If it could, though, wouldn't it have done it by now?
Well, I think there are many considerations, and Israel's only been carrying out this operation now for just about a week. It's also had other priorities as well as dealing with the nuclear program, because let's not forget one of its top priorities is defensive against the Iranian ballistic missile attacks, and has expended a huge amount of air power on dealing with that. Iran's ballistic missile attacks have been largely ineffective. They've resulted in something, it's a terrible thing, I know, 25 deaths, but only something like 25 deaths with something like 500 ballistic missiles fired. The deaths are terrible, but it's not a strategic impact. And Iran appears to be potentially running out of power on its offensive operations, but that's because Israel has devoted so much energy both to destroying launchers and missiles on the ground, but also to intercepting them in the air with US assistance, I might add.
Let's turn to our second segment. If we are looking to move away from conflict towards diplomacy, let's turn our attentions to what's happening in Switzerland. We know that the foreign ministers from the UK, France and Germany, along with the EU's top diplomat, have been in talks with their Iranian counterpart in Geneva. They're trying to coax Iran back to the negotiating table, something Tehran says it's not interested in while it's under attack. Europe was effectively sidelined during the original negotiations led by the US, and people close to the Geneva talks, it's reportedly, are saying that expectations there are low. Ambassador Satterfield, let me ask you, does Europe have the power to broker a deal with Iran, or does that power rest solely with the United States?
No, Europe does not have the power to broker a deal with Iran. What Europe does have the power to do is, given the significant weight these three ministers hold, their countries hold, is to reinforce a single consistent message that you have an opportunity now to preserve yourselves, whatever we think the wisdom or ill wisdom is of the Iranian regime. You have the ability to preserve yourselves from further violence, further kinetic action, but it's a window for preservation that is closing rapidly. Europe does have a critical role here in that regard, and I would hope there is a uniform message.
What do you think about it, Martin? Do you think Europe holds any cards here?
I think Europe has mentally, I wouldn't say good relations, but psychologically, I think they are closer to Iran. When President Trump won, just threw away the JCPOA, Europe continued in a way to save the GCPOA in a marginal way. So I think these relations, they continue. Now, if there are 3 European foreign ministers with the American military power behind them, I mean, because this is not only the elephant in the room, this is quite evident. They can have a significant impact now, and they can tell the Iranian foreign minister, listen, in every conflict, of course, negotiations are going on during the fighting. Now, if the fighting stops, all these ideas of having a ceasefire first and then we go to the negotiation table, I mean, this rarely works. In 90% of the conflicts, I mean, you have fighting and you have negotiation in parallel. And the stronger the parties are under pressure, the more they are inclined to come to the negotiating table. Now, and this can be communicated, I think, I wouldn't say better, but also, or with some insistence by the 3 European foreign ministers, to bring them to the negotiating table and just to find out where the compromise here can be. Now, I'm always thinking, because I was working in Libya on Gaddafi, also gave up finally on nuclearization. He was not as close as the Iranians. However, he gave up at the end of the day and the sanctions were lifted. Now, I think as a European, it is not a good thing that the United States hasn't had diplomatic relations with Iran since 79, since 40 years in the meantime. Now, this is not the kind of, normal relation with the country, even if you do not like the regime. All these kind of things, to enter into diplomatic relations again, to lift the sanctions. This could be, on the other side, a kind of incentive for the Iranians to give up nuclearization of their weapons program.
Richard, I know where you stand on the diplomatic efforts. You don't think that it holds much weight, but do you think that where the US has left the table, well, the US, Iran says it won't come to the table with the US, do you think that Europe has a unique opportunity here to do what the US couldn't?
I don't think so for a moment. I think the Europeans have no cards whatever in their hands. They have no influence over what either the US or the Israelis are doing, and they certainly don't have any influence over Iran. I think the whole purpose of this meeting, from the Iranian side anyway, is to try and string the Europeans along, and to, as they've laid it down clearly so far anyway, that they will not negotiate until the fighting finishes, and that's clearly their objective. They're on the ropes now. They're not finished, but they're on the ropes. And this is one kind of maybe way of pausing the fighting at least. And they're master negotiators, they're master manipulators. And I think that's all they're after. And they won't, I mean, in my opinion, they certainly won't agree to any conditions that have been demanded by the United States or Israel, whatever they feed to the Europeans. I really do think that it's, I'm not saying that the Europeans shouldn't do this, but I don't think it has any value. If anything, it sort of perhaps gives Ayatollah Khomeini the hope that he's going to be able to get out of this without giving up nuclear weapons and without having the entire military and even political elements of his country destroyed.
Martin.
Richard, if I may,
Please.
I mean, how often do we say there is no military solution alone? I mean, this is in Gaza, for other conflicts. Look to Africa. Everywhere, we always keep on saying there is no military solution alone. Now, you might not be in favor. You might think there is a military solution alone. But history shows that there needs to be something else. There needs to be a second pillar. Yes to military action, as we said, but also yes to diplomacy. I mean, these are two sides of the same of the medal. That's why there will be no military solution alone. If they continue militarily, there might be a regime change at the end. If the Iranian people decides to do so, this has to come from within, and then things might be different. There might be more repression. for the people. This is also possible, but militarily, even with the bunker busters of the US, there will not be a solution. This will traumatize the regime, the population of the country, and there will be the call for revenge, as we see it also in other conflicts, and the whole thing will start from the beginning. But now is the chance, with looking to the region, with Gaza, with the Abraham Accords, or what's left with it, with Saudi Arabia coming into the game, now to have a broader regional kind of solution, which must be a political solution. Now Assad is gone, Hezbollah is weakened, Hamas is out of the fighting scope here. Yeah, I mean, now is the chance to really all together, US and the Europeans, not either or, but both, and to take the reins into their hands and now try to get a regional solution in order to bring at least a more durable peace to the region.
David,
Richard,
please.
I would add to Martin's comment. When we speak about a diplomatic end to all of this, let's be clear, if I can read the president's comments, what he means by this. He does not mean an acceptance of the status quo. He means the either physical destruction or complete monitored dismantlement of the nuclear enrichment program in Iran. That is not what the JCPOA provided for. And there'll be no return, I think, to that. Either it gets destroyed by kinetic action, or in the course of an agreed framework with the IAEA and other parties, including regional parties, there is a complete elimination of the nuclear infrastructure and an extensive monitoring regime to try to assure it is not reconstructed again. That's what I believe President Trump means. But I think he is quite exceptional in terms of his desire, based on his own unique background, to see a more normal relationship with a post-nuclear enrichment Iran and a post-ballistic missile threatening Iran. The proxy issue is a different story and a much more difficult one. But I certainly don't believe the president believes that regime change, having watched the debacles of Iraq, Afghanistan post the initial operations against the Taliban, and Libya, is a model that he wishes to be associated with.
Martin, Europe was very quick to condemn Russia's actions in Ukraine, but they've been relatively quiet until very recently regarding Israel's actions in Gaza, despite the ICC issuing arrest warrants. Now they're backing Israel in this conflict too. Has Europe, and the West maybe more broadly, relinquished its role as this standard bearer of the rules-based order?
Well, I mean, if you compare Ukraine now to Israel, I mean, Russia attacked Ukraine, so without any reason, and that's why we were very quick in condemning this, and we are fighting or delivering weapons and supporting Ukraine until this very day. Also here, one shouldn't forget that the diplomatic channel is not functioning, and it's only military, and there will be no military solution. Now, when it comes to Israel, there was the attack of Hamas, and 1,200 people were killed there. And that's why Europe and others, not only Europe, but also others said, well, this is the right of self-defense under the UN Charter to defend yourself against such an attack. Now, when it turned unproportional, when other military aims or other aims came into being, the kind of dehumanization of the Palestinians, the chasing the hundreds of thousands from one corner of Gaza to the other, of using hunger as a weapon, then the opinion changed also in Europe. Yes, it was legitimate at the beginning. However, it has to be under humanitarian international law. It has to be a proportional action. And I also think you cannot bomb a hospital, you cannot bomb a school with hundreds of people in it, even if there is a tunnel of Hamas underneath. This is unproportional. And then even with the Germans, and we always have a very special, within the European caucus, we have a special historical responsibility vis-a-vis Israel. Even here, also with our new government, this is now clear, and everybody says that this is not proportional and this contradicts humanitarian law. Now, this was a process. It was justified at the beginning. It is justified when it comes to the excesses of self-defense, as we can see it now in Gaza.
Mm-hmm. Richard, what do you make of that? I mean, why would Iran rush back to the table when it feels like it's the one being attacked? Does Europe and the West, have they relinquished their rules-based order crown?
I think in relation to Gaza, I don't see that as being disproportionate. I see it as being very, very terrible, very horrific devastation. What I would like to hear from somebody, and I've not heard it from anybody yet, and I'm not talking about in this discussion, but in the broader sense, how you would deal with the situation that Israel's facing in Gaza, where it has a terrorist entity still holding on to a significant number of Israeli hostages, and a leadership that continues to threaten to repeat 7th of October again and again and again. Now, you have one of two options. You either continue to attack those terrorists until they've been eliminated, or at least taken from any form of offensive capability or control of Gaza, and you release the hostages, or unfortunately many of the hostages may die in the process. Or you simply say, well, we'll just leave Gaza, we'll stop fighting Hamas, we will allow them to rebuild themselves as they see fit. There's not really any other option apart from that. And if Israel decides that it's not prepared to take that second option, to my mind, it has little choice other than to continue the operations it's been doing up to now, terrible though they are. But where are the other options? Where's the other military solutions that people come up with? There's no political solution here. I mean, I'm not saying that there couldn't be, but right now, Hamas is not going to surrender. It's not going to give up the hostages without the fight that's going on now. And as to using starvation or hunger as a weapon, I dispute that. I don't think that has been a tactic in Israel's operations at all. What Israel did at one point was to prevent humanitarian aid getting into Gaza.
Okay.
For the simple reason that aid was being, in a large amount of cases, most of it was being diverted to use by Hamas and stolen by Hamas and then resold to the population, which Israel is entirely entitled under international law to prevent that from happening. It now has put in place a means of getting aid into Gaza, which doesn't fall into Hamas control. And in fact, I visited one of the aid stations that was doing this work a couple of days ago, and they're doing very effective work. And this is partly as a result of Israel's initiative. So Israel's not trying to starve the Gazan population at all.
Okay. All right. I'm just going to turn us back to Iran here.
May I just say that the Israeli leadership told so very clearly. Minister Gallant, for example, no food, no medicine, no water, no fuel. I mean, this was clearly spelled out. It's in the world. You can Google it. You can see it. You can see the video. I mean, this was clearly spelled out by the Israeli government not to deliver any humanitarian goods, and that produces the hunger. So, I mean, this was clearly spelled out.
Yes, but
this was at the beginning, and I think it should be seen as
those remarks were made on
wartime
October 8th.
rhetoric. It certainly hasn't.
Okay.
Certainly hasn't played out that way.
October 21.
Israel's facilitated vast amounts of aid into Gaza since the war began.
I'm just going to turn us back onto Iran, because maybe we'll get you all back to talk Israel-Gaza on another show. David, before we move on to our final section, I just want to ask you about that point that I put to the other two gentlemen. Why should Iran have any reliability with
Sure.
you?
Here, you want me to tell you why? I will. because Iran is in desperate economic shape. The corruption, the incompetency of the administration, its expenditures on issues related to the enrichment of the ruling circle, the IRGC and others, has left the country beggared completely. It needs sanction relief, and it can only get that from the U.S., and it can only get that if this enrichment program ends. That's the short and sweet answer to your question.
Okay. All right. Look, let's move on to our final segment here. I mean, Israel launched these strikes saying that they were preemptive strikes. They are aware of the fact that even though, as some of our guests have said, perhaps they can take out Fordo on their own, it's going to be much harder without US support. There is no guarantee that that support is forthcoming or that it will even work. Even President Trump himself has reportedly questioned the ability of these bunker busters to take out Fordo about 100 metres underground. So could we be seeing boots on the ground now, maybe tactical nuclear weapons used if some reports out of the US are to be leaked?
Let me interrupt.
Go ahead.
This is speculation that goes beyond the bounds of any realistic prospects. There's not going to be U.S. boots on the ground.
No, Israeli boots. I'm not saying U.S. boots on the ground. I'm saying that Israel may need to send.
I suspect
boots.
Israel already has shoes and boots, either there or able to be there, but not for an invasion purposes, for tactical operations, as Richard referred to, correct?
Indeed.
But
absolutely, that if they're going to take out Fordo, they're going to need to do it differently. They're going to need a different strategy. It's not going to be easy. It's costing Israel a lot of money every night with its missile defense system. So, David, has Israel taken it too far? Should they never have done this strike in the first place?
No.
Was there a better way to have handled it?
I do not believe Israel has taken it too far. And I can only quote here, Martin, the Chancellor's words from earlier this week, which was an extraordinarily frank, honest admission to the world. Israel is doing the dirty work of the world for it, against this regime and the threats, the multiple threats that it poses. However, having said that, when Israeli rhetoric or actions on the ground go beyond the nuclear program, the ballistic missile program, the specific threatening entities of the regime, into rhetoric or actions directed at regime change, that I think is not helpful.
And we have heard from Israel Katz, I believe, saying just recently that someone like the Ayatollah, the supreme leader, cannot be allowed to exist. So isn't that an indication that Israel is considering regime change as a very real operational objective?
It's a piece of political rhetoric from a minister in the Israeli government. I can
the defense minister.
Lots and lots of the. It is political rhetoric, and it should not be construed beyond that.
So you don't believe that regime change is part of what Israel is trying to achieve?
As a
I would say Israel is
first-order effect? No, I do not.
Richard?
I would say Israel would like to see regime change in Iran, as I think most of us would. And I think the Israeli government sees this, their operations in Gaza. It's not their primary objective, but I think it sees them potentially as enabling regime change, encouraging oppositionist groups within Iran to stand up and get rid of the regime. And I think the rhetoric of Israel Katz and also of Benjamin Netanyahu has really been more about encouraging the Iranian oppositionists to do that and giving them at least some kind of not incentive exactly, but yeah, encouragement and to the weakness they've seen in their regime already, their inability really to defend themselves against a much, much smaller country. must send a message to the Iranian, those people who want to rise up. And I think that's what it's all about. I don't think that it's a specific objective to change the regime themselves. And just going back to the point you made about boots on the ground, I agree with Martin and David. I don't think that certainly American boots on the ground are not going to happen. We know that Israeli boots have been on the ground already, special forces, and there's every possibility that they might be deployed for specific limited tasks in the future. But certainly there's no prospect of Israel attempting to invade or occupy Iran with its own armed forces. I think that's...
No, I don't think anyone's suggesting that Israel is looking to occupy Iran. Martin, let me ask you, I mean, when we consider how many of Iran's missiles are able to breach the missile defense shield that Israel has, do you think this was a miscalculation on their behalf?
No, I don't think it was a miscalculation. We had the first round a few months ago where Iranian drones were attacking also there. It was clear that not everything can be intercepted. I think the Israeli air defense system is working reasonably well. As Richard said, every single Israeli who dies in an attack is one too many, and every Iranian is one too many, civilian. But I mean, this will not be an existential threat for Israel now. However, I would like to make one point. I'm always thinking back of the Iran-Iraq war, where we had similar discussions on how strong the Iranian army after 79 would be. And this was a 7 or 8 years war. So I'm not very sure whether we don't also underestimate the capability of Iran to react, because this was done before. However, I would agree with those who say the Iranian regime, because of the repression, is weak. I suggest 80% of the population do not like the regime, and they would like to see them gone sooner than later. However, as we see it in Israel, it is solidarized. So there's a movement of solidarity now. It was breaking because of Gaza, and everybody said we cannot go on like this. However, now solidarity in Israel is back, and there is also solidarity back in Iran now with the people that this cannot happen, that they are aided, that they are helped, that they are assisted by the Israelis to bring a fall to their regime. So it is quite uncertain. But coming back to your question, no, I don't think this will be an existential threat for Israel. That's why it's all the more important that these nuclear facilities are, if not totally destroyed, but brought to a level that the making of nuclear warheads is not anymore possible.
All right, we're almost out of time. Let me just put one question to all of you. I'll start with you, Ambassador Satterfield, first of all. What's your prediction? What do you think, with your vast experience in the region, what do you envisage happening in the next days, next coming weeks? How do you think this will play out?
It's very difficult for my crystal ball any longer to be precise on this. But if you ask me to opine, it is that the threat to the revolutionary regime, by making a concession, even a concession that preserves it from the U.S. entering this combat, is probably, in the view of the supreme leader and those around him, the worst of the two options. Better to endure what the U.S. may or may not do, rally the troops, as Martin said, and see what comes after, than to take the humiliating step of conceding the enrichment program. I hope that's not the case, but I rather suspect that is what the regime, which sees its own survival threatened by a concession, will go. But I hope not.
Okay, Martin, what's your crystal ball prediction?
Well, I agree. The survival of the regime is of utmost importance. It is weak, and they feel it is weak. So the repression will go on probably, but I'm not sure whether they do not want to enter at least into negotiation in order to avoid a protracted fight. So well, confident is too much, yeah. But if I look into the crystal ball, I think the pressure on the Iranians to sit together with the Europeans/Americans in order to discuss, not with a specific, aim at conceding the denuclearization of their program. This is possible without losing face. We should not forget that psychological factors, what David mentioned, the feeling of humiliation, that this is equally important. However, the Iranian regime wants to survive, and I think they're doing everything possible to make this happen, that they are not kicked out by their population.
Okay, Richard, round us out. What's your prediction over the coming days or weeks?
I think it hinges to a large the way this pans out. I think hinges to a very large extent on the decision of President Trump. And unlike, I don't know if David is in a position to do so, but I certainly can't see into President Trump's mind and figure out what he's going to do. But I would say that the reason I say it hinges on Trump is first of all, because I think this ongoing conflict is likely to continue in its current form pretty much for a little while, unless Trump decides to strike Fordo or another target, and that could shorten it. If not, I think we're going to see the conflict going on even longer. The final point to make, I think, is that US military intervention in this conflict now could make a significant difference to the readiness or otherwise of the Iranian oppositionists to try and bring down their regime. So I think a lot of the future does depend on President Trump's decision.
As always, we turn our eyes to the White House or maybe social media to see what the president is going to do next. Gentlemen, I wish we had more time because I've really enjoyed all of your thoughts and analysis on this, but unfortunately we have to leave it there. So thank you very much to Ambassador David Satterfield, a former US ambassador who worked as President Biden's special envoy for humanitarian aid for Gaza. German diplomat Martin Kobler, a former UN special envoy for Libya, and Colonel Richard Kemp, a former British military officer who has worked in operations both in Iraq and Afghanistan. Gentlemen, thank you for your time here on CounterPoints. And thank you to you at home for watching CounterPoints on Al Arabiya English. To tune in to our latest debates and interviews, and of course avoid missing out on all of our content, subscribe to Al Arabiya English on YouTube and be sure to follow us on X and TikTok. We'll see you next time.